Hey, profs, welcome on in. My name's Rob Lightfoot, proud two-time alum of Rick Edelman College of Communication, class of 2001. This is Beyond the Brown and Gold.
I'm Jessica Kennedy. I'm the co-host here, also a two-time proud Rowan alum, class of 2008 from the Rick Edelman College of Communication and Creative Arts, and 2015 from the College of Education. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Rowan Radio 89.7 WGLS FM presents Beyond the Brown and Gold, a show that highlights the lives and memories of Glassboro State and Rowan University alumni. Now, here are your hosts, Rob Lightfoot and Jessica Kennedy.
On today's show, we have a 2012 alum with a BA in Communication Studies, Alex McGroarty. Alex is an accomplished HR consultant, and she's also an author with 2 books out on the shelves right now and one coming this summer as well. The first book, Bridging the Gap, Reducing Gender Bias in the Workforce, and her second book, So Now What? Harnessing Grief After Life's Major Losses.
And just her children's book that's coming out to address this grief issue as with the loss of her husband that she shares.
Yes. It's a very kind of deep interview. We do kind of go a little bit all over the map. Authoring, HR, grief and loss, personal life.
We're deep people ourselves.
I mean, we really like to get things out of folks.
Yeah, we do.
I love this show because how often do you get to sit down with folks who are alums of the institution for like an hour or so and just really get to know them on a personal level? I think that's the most special part that we get to share with the audience.
Yeah, we get to find out their passions and interests, and you'll find out more about Alex in this show.
We are so excited to have Alex with us today. Alex, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Where did you come from today?
I am in Marlton now, and I was just talking about this. So this is my first time back on campus in 11 years now.
Wow.
So I'm really excited. This building looks the same to me, although I did find myself lost getting here. But it's so nice just to see all the changes and how wonderful it looks here.
Well, I'm excited because we had Alex join us. So I'm a member of the Women's Alliance Network. I'm currently serving as a chair on the board there. And we had Alex come on and do a virtual event for us. And she was just so fabulous. And I was like, wow, she's an alum. Let's get her on our pod. So we're really excited to have you today and talk about, we want to spend so much time talking about your book and your HR experience, but maybe we could just rewind a little bit and take us back to the beginning of how you got to Rowan, how you found out about the institution, and what made you come here.
Absolutely. So when I went to Rowan, I lived in Sicklerville, which is the opposite way of Marlton. There was a program back then called the NJ Star Program, which was a scholarship that if you went to 2 years of community school and then you went into 2 years of state school, they covered a large majority of your college expenses, which was just amazing. So Rowan was an obvious choice for me. It was the closest 4-year university to where I was living at the time. And I was just easily commutable. I didn't have to live on campus. I was here in 15 minutes, which was great because I worked when I was in college. And so that was always well done with my schedule there.
What were you hoping to do?
So I think I had 3 majors while I was here. I started as advertising, and then I got the pre-med bug because I worked in a medical facility while I was going to Rowan and was convinced that I was going to be a doctor when I left. I think I made it 2 semesters.
Okay.
Chemistry threw me off very quickly.
Chemistry. I'm sorry. For anybody in the chemistry world, that's just another thing.
Chemistry threw me off, and then I think my second anatomy and physiology course, I could not take the smells. So I very quickly was like, this is not for me. And I've now been here forever. So what can I do to move myself along? So I went back to communication studies.
Yeah, it's much better, much easier.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you were a communication studies student, did you have Dr. Maria Simone?
I did.
Oh my gosh. I loved her.
Yeah.
She was such a wonderful teacher.
Yeah.
Was she one of your favorites?
She was. She was. And I loved that I could be here just about any time of the day and have fantastic teachers and professors.
Any that stood out for you in your experience here?
I would say Dr. Simone, for sure.
She was hard, right?
She was.
I know, but I liked it.
I did too.
How was she? What made her difficult?
She
stickler.
Yes, she was. She was very intense. I don't even know. I think it's like she's even more than a triathlete, but she moved out to the mountains but she was so excited about what she taught that she sweat through it. You would watch her be so intense in the room. So she was very engaging, but the work that you had to do when you weren't in the classroom, all the papers and everything and the tests, they were very, very challenging. But I personally thought that was great because she gave a lot of great feedback.
Yes.
And even though she was difficult, I took her twice because I felt like I was able to grow in that course. So that was really.
I loved it. I think there were times I was like, oh my gosh, it's 8:00 at night. Like, let's just wrap this up. We can get through this. It's okay.
Meanwhile, I was like, sweat more. I love it.
Yeah. But
she was so great.
But looking back, she really was. And I think it gave me quite an appreciation for the communications field.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
And then so with the hopes of what would your career start to look like and start to shape up in your mind?
So when I went to school and when I was in communications originally, I wanted to be a journalist. I love to write. And I think that was at a point in time where you started to see the newspapers fold. It really wasn't the career choice that was a smart move right out of college.
I was trying to figure out where that inspiration was coming from because it wasn't necessarily
it wasn't.
industry.
It wasn't the best time to get into that. And so I had a really great job at that point in time. I was working in a medical facility. I was meeting a lot of new people. I was getting to do special projects, which was great, and use my communication skills and writing internal memos and things like that, which was really nice for somebody in college and just getting out of college. And so I didn't really know where I wanted to go other than I really liked healthcare. There was someone that I worked with in that facility that went to another facility that said, there's an opening in the human resources department. I know that that's not the track that you're necessarily on, but I really think you'll like the people here. So why don't you just try it out? So I went for an interview and I got the job, and I've been in human resources ever since.
So what is it about human resources that is so caught your attention that got you excited about it?
So I think traditionally you see human resources as like the policy person, the person that's telling you, no, you can't do that. That's just not what's going to happen. And what I love about human resources is it's what can we make happen for the organization. If you're in an organization that really supports and values HR, it's all about how do we make the culture here great? How do we do great things for these people that are here on a day-to-day basis? And so that's really what's kept me in HR.
And what are the challenges of the field, I feel, is that professional development piece? Are you,
yes,
especially at larger organizations where you can't necessarily steer the ship as quickly, right? It's like moving the Titanic. So how do you guys navigate that?
Yeah, so I've always taken the philosophy that, yes, the organization is definitely has a responsibility for your professional development, but so do you. So you can't sit around and wait for someone to professionally develop you. You have to take that initiative. And so it's the person or the squeaky wheel, so to say, right, that gets the grease. And that's the avocation for you. So go out there, tell us what you want to do. How do I help you get to where you want to be? And that helps me guide the organization around.
And let's be honest. Now, you can just tell us because it's only the three of us.
Yeah.
Well, four of us.
Plus the listeners.
As the HR person, are you getting the looks when you walk in the buildings?
Of course. I'm the token HR lady. I've been called the HR lady so many times in my career.
That's such an awful thing.
I know.
I feel kind of bad.
I was the only woman on the leadership team in my last corporate function, and I frequently got the feedback, or my team got the feedback, that you have that token HR lady on the team, right? That's your female presence. And I'm like, well, I think I'm a little bit more than the HR lady. Like, I bring great perspective to this team, but I get what you're trying to say.
I almost think human resources would be a field more dominated by women.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, so you were, that was like strange that you were the token HR lady.
Well, yeah. So I would say, I think what their perspective was, it was a table of all men. And of course, the function of the HR is going to be the lady at the table, right? The woman at the table. And so that really opened my eyes to say, yeah, there's not a lot of people in the leadership team that look like me, that talk like me, that are my age. And so what can I do about that?
Is that what inspired you to write your book? Was that kind of your first entry into?
Yeah. So I think a bit of from just growing up and what I experienced in gender roles in the home and from a family perspective. And it really compounded when I got to that corporate setting because I was promoted into a vice president role fairly early. So I was a VP before the time I was 30. And the team around the table was, I would say, 40s plus. All male. And so I very much suffered with, oh my gosh, why am I here? Like, this is, I don't deserve this position. Somebody's going to figure that out really quickly.
The imposter syndrome?
Yes. Instead of saying, well, how do I make it so that other people like me, other individuals that identify like me get here? It was very much like, oh my gosh, one day they're going to figure me out and I'm not going to be here anymore.
Let's go back to the gender roles growing up, right? So what did that, if you don't mind sharing, what did that look like for you? Because I think it's probably gender roles are pretty much something that we've all experienced similarly growing up. So what was your experience?
Yeah. So I would say if you looked at my family from the outside, we were the perfect middle class family. It was a boy and a girl, two parents that had great jobs. We had a nice house. We had the
Did you have a
dogs.
dog?
We
I was
did.
gonna say.
We did. Multiple at one time. But when you started to come inside the house, it was very much a different feel. My father suffered with alcoholism, and so was fantastic at work. But when you came home, you experienced a very different person. My mom was dealing with that and the emotional abuse that came with that while also dealing with children. And so she was distant at times. And so I started to see a very different perspective, that you didn't talk about things outside the home. You portrayed that, yes, everything's wonderful and everything's going great aspect of it. And that really carried with me.
You have a
up into
little
school.
maiden named Carella,
I
so
do.
you're an Italian.
I am. I
Okay.
am. Yes.
But that's like, okay, I'm not
Yeah.
going to speak for all the Italians. I'll just speak for my Italian
Yeah.
family because
Yeah.
I don't want to put us in a
and that's,
box.
by the way, it's
Yeah.
Jess Kennedy at
Previously or Tuso. So
Yes.
if you're wondering how a Kennedy is speaking,
Yeah.
that's not my real name. It is my real name now. But I also think that's a cultural thing too,
Oh, absolutely.
of keeping like what happens in this house stays here, but
Yes.
nobody can know anything.
Right. Every time we go out in public, it's just perfect. You behave yourself. You're not talking unless you're spoken to, right? Like you're not out of line. We're doing the sports and we're getting the varsity letters, and everybody is just this perfect check the box family.
So you saw your mom from a young age really take on the role of kind of managing the
Everything.
household.
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Keeping
So
the house
she
running.
worked too full time, and then I had a brother who was 7 years younger than me, so I took a bit of a mini mom.
Yeah, a little
perspective.
motherly role. Yeah.
Even though I was always told he has a mother, you don't have to do that.
You're like, but I'm helping.
Yes,
This is kind of
but
ingrained
I'm
in my
7
system.
And, yeah.
And I'm sorry, what did your mom do for her career?
She's a nurse.
That's
Yep.
a challenging career.
Yeah, and my dad led a program in nursing and that he was very well renowned for. Great in their professions, I think well known in their professions, respected in their professions, and so it was just a very different experience at home.
Is that where the pre-med maybe came from?
Well, everyone in my family, or I would say everyone in quotation marks, was in the medical field. And so I was like, yeah, I can do this. Like, I can be in healthcare. I have that gene in me. And then I got into my chemistry class and I was like, this is very much not for me.
Just kidding.
Scraping by in calculus.
Oh, God.
Let's go back before we dive into more of your HR experiences.
Yeah.
Were you were a communication studies major?
I
That's
was.
kind of where you landed. But
Yeah.
were you involved in any clubs or activities or anything that you got? I know as a
no,
commuter,
yeah.
it's different for
it
everybody.
was a different experience as a commuter. So I was really just here for my classes and I left and I went home. And so I didn't necessarily have that experience where I was in clubs and I was sticking around after class and making friends and having a really great community here, which I miss. I do miss, I think, but there were also positives of being a commuter. I could get to work. I could do other things. I was home within 15 minutes. And so just had to weigh what worked for me.
So from a perspective of your first career move out of here,
Yeah.
what was your sense as this college student with this sort of general degree? I mean, there's not really like, because I always hear the question that's asked of like, well, what do you do with this degree now,
Exactly.
this comm study? Like, what's the next
It's just a
step?
general degree, right? Like, so I already had a full-time job, which I was very lucky to have while I was in school. So I didn't have to make a move right away. And I wasn't pushed to make a move as soon as I graduated. So it was very much like, okay, I have a degree now, and I'm just going to stay where I'm at because I'm happy where I'm at. And that was an experience that I'm very aware is unique to my situation. So I really appreciated that, and didn't make a move until I had that individual say, I think you should try this out.
So what was your first major experience with gender bias in the workforce?
So my role within the healthcare profession started as an administrative assistant. I never saw a male in that role. That was always a female. And so I don't think I, though, went and said, oh, wow, this is a female role. It was just something that looking back on now that I could say, wow, there wasn't really ever a male in a front desk type role. It was just us, right? Like that was traditionally a women's job. And even when I moved into HR, I moved into as an HR coordinator or assistant as a starting point. And again, I never really saw a male in that position until you got higher up in HR.
When you first were able to kind of see like the first flag of like, hey, this is like a woman's job
Yeah.
or experience, and then you moved to this VP role where
Yeah.
you were surrounded by all men.
Yeah.
What was that like, and what was that kind of your thought process of, I really need to think about this and look into this as for all the other women in the workforce I'm
Yeah.
supporting?
After the excitement died down, because initially it was like, oh my gosh, I'm in this major role. I'm 29. Like I'm making a lot more than I know my other 29-year-olds are, and this is so
With,
exciting.
by the way, a communication degree.
Yeah.
So thank you very much,
Thank
everybody.
you, Rowan. Thank you, Rowan.
Thank you for giving us a little bit of a bump on that bell curve.
Exactly, because it's not, everybody always says, oh, it's the engineers.
Yes.
Or it's, no, communication.
Communications.
Thank you.
She did all right. She did all right.
Then it was like, oh, nobody has that state school in their background at the table. It was a Wharton. It was Harvard. It was Cornell. And it's like, I went to Rowan, and which I was proud of, but it just didn't look like the background that other people at the table had. And I was at least 10 years younger than the other individuals at the table. And so was I there because I knew HR, or was I there because they needed to infuse something from a different perspective? And so I wrestled with that quite a bit. And I knew my stuff, or I wouldn't be there. I had so much respect for the individual that promoted me into that position. And I knew she wouldn't put me there if she didn't think I would be there. But I just wrestled internally with, am I going to be able to make a change? Are my opinions really going to be heard? Should I speak up and say something, or are they going to look at me and say, where are you even coming from with that? Right? Like, that makes no sense. And I would sit there and I would find the things that I wanted to say were coming out of everybody else's mouth, but I wasn't contributing because I was so wrapped up in this perspective that I'm going to look like I don't belong here if I start taking part in this conversation.
Yeah, but it's that diversity of thought.
Yeah.
That's needed from every perspective,
Right.
not just male, female, but from age, from everything.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think that's hard, kind of like you were serving in the quote unquote token HR role, but it's like, there's value in that, right? Because you could add perspective, but also then you wonder, like, am I here just to add that?
Exactly.
Or, it's kind of like a tough balance of, And I could speak from my experience. I think I'm a pretty assertive, strong female, but I can be emotional at times, which is not something that makes male coworkers very uncomfortable.
Yes.
And I always say, like, I will never advance because I'm an emotional person. Yeah. Do you see that as something that kind of exists as a barrier for women in the workplace?
I think one of the things that, just from a personal perspective, that I had to deal with quite a bit was reorgs and restructures in a corporation, especially as you're acquiring companies and you're merging with companies. And with that comes, we now have to lay a bunch of people off, right? Because there's just duplicative roles. And so I would sit through exercises and risk exercises and just like, well, this person's going through this and this person's going through that. And it's like, well, it's just business, Alex. And I'm like, but at the end of the day, there's a person connected to the conversation that we're having.
Right. Yeah, the human resource.
Yeah. I'm like, so how do we have that conversation in a way that, yes, it is a business decision, but we're also taking care of people, right? And it was foreign in thought to say, all right, these people have all these things going on. Let's just say it's a business decision and move on. And I was the person to bring that up. And I think that tied to, there we go. We have an emotional connection with the woman at the table, right? She can't just handle it as a business decision. It's now, well, this person has this going on and this person has this going on. And we can't do that because this person's having this. And so I did see it in micro ways, I would say, across the board. And it was never fully we're not going to listen to Alex because she's a female, or I don't respect her opinion because she's younger than me. There were just little micro transgressions along the way.
But it takes a while to chip away at that.
Absolutely.
So how do you infuse that change?
Yeah.
Though?
So I think, one, I really respect the leadership at the corporate level that I was at to say, we do need diversity of thought and we need diversity of opinion. And I think this individual will work well in this role. And after I joined the team and before I left the team, I was very lucky to see more women at the table, and not just women, but people of different backgrounds and ethnicities, and not your traditional quote unquote, here's what makes an executive level individual. And so I think it's that evolution of what our leadership teams look like, right? People want to see people that look like them, that talk like them, that have those thoughts on those teams. And when primarily it was an older generational, primarily white leadership team that didn't encapsulate the whole of the corporation, and
it's
really
not representative of all the employees you're supposedly serving, right?
And so of course they're not going to understand my experience because they've not gone through my experience. And so really putting a commitment to that at the leadership level is where you start. I think I'm a huge proponent of, you can't make the changes at the front line without having leadership buy-in and executive level buy-in. So it starts at the top.
So let's stay on this vein for a second. For maybe students who are looking to become HR professionals, is there a set of skills that you wish you had come in with to your career prior to that you can suggest that they kind of pursue? Or
Yeah. Well, I can tell you don't have to do pre-med. So
okay.
Yeah.
Wipe that off the table.
So congratulations, kids.
Yes,
That's off.
Yeah. You don't have to take 2 to 3 semesters of pre-med and derail your 4-year graduation. But yeah, I think I wish I spent more time in the gender studies. I wish I spent more time in diversity studies at all. And I think at the time that I was here, that was a fairly new topic. I think it's really been an influx given what's going on in society, what we're seeing on the news as of late. But back in 2010, 2012, that wasn't necessarily a class that you saw unless you went and you were searching for it. And so I think focusing on diversity of thought, diversity of gender, diversity of ethnicity, and that's just really touching the surface anywhere you can, that will really help you in your career.
So you released your first, I like how this is written, your first book.
Yes.
Yeah. And what year did you write that?
So I wrote that last year. It came out last year. It is Bridging the Gap, Reducing Gender Bias in the Workforce. And then I released my second book this year, So Now What? Harnessing Grief After Life's Major Losses.
Now, I'm going to go to a little quote from your book that you open it with. It says, "We live in a society that begs women to love themselves, but then tells confident women to sit down." What does that mean to you?
To me, I think what we see is, yes, there is this grassroots movement that women are worthy of being in the workforce. They can be a mom, they can be an executive, they can do all of those things, but in a way that you're not disrupting the status quo, right? Once you start to disrupt the status quo, then we start to have some issues with what that looks like. And that's really what I experienced a bit in corporate life. And I've seen other females in leadership positions, and not even just leadership positions, in just frontline or beginning management positions as they're moving through the workforce.
Do you think that there's a higher expectation of women to handle more? Like personally, and like just thinking back to your mom's experience, she was running the household. She was a successful worker. She, had personal things going on in her marriage, but she kind of kept that all in. I think now we have a society kind of like what you're saying, where we're more open to talking about that, but not maybe necessarily dealing with it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's the first step, right, is talking. But I think talking only gets us so far. And I think we're very rapidly getting to a point in time where we've had those talks and we keep having those talks. But what's the action that's coming out of it, right? I'm really starting to see that with a lot of the individuals that I interact with on a day-to-day basis. But I think we are still there, that we say you can be quote unquote super mom, but what does that look like? You're running the household, you're taking care of the kids, you're working a 9 to 5. And now with COVID and since the pandemic, for a lot of people, you don't even leave the house. Like all of those things happen in the span of 14 to 16 hours a day in one space because we've been driven out of the office and back into work. At least when we went into the office 4 or 5 days a week, we had a very delineated life, right? You had home and then you were at work and then you stopped work and you were at home. And now all of those things intersect.
It's blurred.
Yeah.
Do you find that even as a male since COVID that I find this personally that they're pre-COVID, it seemed like I could kind of like put things in boxes.
Yes.
And then post-COVID, although we got more flexibility and lots of wonderful, benefits, everything got like blurred. And I think the communication got like more intense and the level of expectation got higher, which is strange because COVID, you thought everything would kind of slow down.
And I found myself violating my own rules as far as like my, checking my email.
All the time.
All the time. Before my rule was, nope, between these and these hours, that this is where we're going to go.
Yeah.
Very structured, keeping it. Now, like, I'll even find myself Saturday mornings going like,
I know.
Like, nope, I put it down.
It got so bad that I had to set like daily limits on my apps because
that's a great idea.
But you can ignore those, which is my problem.
I know.
Jessica Rose.
Yes, I know. But yeah, I was just glued to my screen because I was like, these individuals know I'm at home. If I don't respond right away, they're going to move on to the next person that is going to answer them.
How are you, as an HR professional, infusing some of the change that you want to see from your desk when you're maybe not interacting directly with some of the frontline employees, where the managers and supervisors are really seeing maybe some of the challenges?
Absolutely. So I think from an HR perspective, I have always been an advocate that you cannot be an effective HR professional if you are not out and understanding who it is that you're serving. So, for example, if you're in a healthcare organization, go spend some time on the floor where it's safe and when it's possible to understand what your people go through on a day-to-day basis. How do they interact with patients? What are issues that they're encountering? connect it and make it the human part of human resources. But if you just sit behind a desk and you're enacting policies on a day-to-day basis, you're not going to do your job well. And I doubt that you're going to be fulfilled in what you're doing either when you're lucky enough. And I know the pandemic created a lot of flexibility and opportunities to work fully remote. And so you may never interact in a face-to-face capacity with the individuals you serve.
That's kind
and
of crazy.
So how do you start to look at situations a little bit differently? Do you join a group? Do you join an employee resource group? Do you lead a group? Do you do one-on-ones or ask to sit in on team meetings just so that you can understand the business? Because if you don't understand the business that you're working for, then you're not going to be able to make really grounded decisions.
Having to draft policies.
Yes.
Is got to
Bane of
be.
Are
my
you using
existence.
ChatGPT? That's what Rob wants.
I have, I have not yet, but I have had like 20 people tell me you just need to enact this on a daily basis. And so
I used it the other
You
day.
gotta,
Yeah.
you kind of got to use it, but it's got to be awful, right?
well, it's my communication studies background where we had to do everything for yourself. We weren't there yet. We weren't in the digital communications
Yeah.
age just yet. So I'm gonna lean back on here's what I learned in school and I like it this way.
It's so wild. And then you must have had some pretty wild interactions.
Oh man.
In
I
your role.
think my favorite.
Yeah,
my
is there one?
all-time-
We'll
my-
call the person.
My all-time favorite, and this won't identify anybody, but
Good.
I worked in a global organization and I had the opportunity to support India. And our India campus sat next to their local junkyard.
Okay.
And so I got a call early in the morning our time and said, we can't go into work. The rabid monkeys from the junkyard are standing in front of our door. What do I do?
That's a thing.
And I was like, I don't think anything in my classes ever prepared me for like, what
Not
do I
sure,
do with
never heard
monkeys?
that
I
one
was
before.
like, as a person, let's not approach the monkeys. So if you can't get in the door, we'll figure it out. Just maybe go home.
We'll touch base later when we know you're
Do you
safe.
have your laptop? Yes. Okay, go home. And we'll make it work. Like we'll figure
Perfect.
it out
Yeah.
and we'll talk to the junkyard and figure out how the monkeys aren't there tomorrow.
Oh my god!
I don't think they're having that issue on Rowan's campus.
No, I haven't seen
can't.
any.
Oh, we
I
have a
don't
vet
know.
school coming soon, so I don't know.
Oh, maybe they'll start crossing over 320.
We'll
I
have to
can't
dra-
get down
There you go.
322.
Right.
The donkeys are in the way.
We'll have to draft a new policy.
Yeah.
Does your husband work in HR?
So my husband passed away. So I was HR and he was all business. He worked for the Navy for most of his life in engineering. And then we started our consulting company together, which was great because we were just exhausted during the pandemic. I will never forget this. We sat in our basement on the couch and I just looked at him and I was like, I'm just tired. I'm so tired. I'm on all the time. You're on all the time. And like we're contributing to somebody else's dream. Like this isn't necessarily what I want to do for the rest of my life. And so it literally was, let's start a business. Like we just looked at each other and we're like, let's just go do our own thing.
Yeah.
And it was always meant to be a side project and it took off. So we were really lucky. It took off and we were both able to leave corporate before he passed away, which is great. It put me in a place though very quickly, like, oh my gosh, do I go back and do the safe thing? Do I go back to corporate or do I stick with this? And thankfully, I stuck with it because now I get to make my day look like what I wanted to do. I get to work around my kids' schedules and I get to be there for activities and field day and things like that. And so it is very much where we wanted to be and what we wanted to do. But I would say research things before you do that. Don't just decide on the couch in the basement that like, yeah, I'm going to start a business and go do it. But it worked out for us. So.
And how old are your kids?
So they're 8 and 6. Lucas is 8. He told me yesterday that he's going to be on America's Got Talent next year.
Great.
So watch out for the 8-year-old
What
with
is
a
he going to be
recorder.
Writing
doing?
his name down. Writing his
With a
name down.
recorder. My 6-year-old Ava is the total opposite. She is the light of my life, though I feel like every day I get a note from her teacher on something else that she's done. And she'll
Good
own it.
though. Good notes.
Yeah.
Not HR notes. Not notes. that go
Depends
to
on
HR.
the day. Depends on the day. But I'm like, she's either going to run a company or she's going to cause a lot of serious trouble. But I'm hoping we use our powers for good. She's going to be on America's Got Talent too, but she's going to play the guitar. So I'll let you know when they're both on there.
Perfect. I can't wait. So talk about balancing your single mom.
Yeah.
And you have this business and what's it like to balance all of that?
It's tough. I'm not going to be here, sit here and say that this is the most amazing thing. It works for me because it allows me to do what I want to do. But there are nights when I'm working way past the time that they're in bed because I chose to take off a couple hours during the day when they were up. There's days where I will close the home office door and it might as well not exist because we just walk through it anyway and just be like, I need another 30 minutes. Like, just give me another 30 minutes. And it's tough because you have 2 little people who are like, I'm home. I did school. Like, why aren't you done?
You be done.
And there's really like real people behind my computer screen that expect things to be done the day that they ask me to get it done. And so it is a tough balance. I don't have it mastered. It works for us though. I mean, we have a lot of fun times, and I think we've just found our way, which is really nice.
In your book, you mentioned that 44% of women get more requests than men. This is so interesting to do non-promotable tasks. So sitting on low-level committees, plan parties and events. I'm on the social committee in our division, and it's all ladies. And perform necessary routine work because men are less likely to do so. Why do you think that is?
Because there's a long history of us just saying yes to it, right? Because we're quote unquote lucky to be in the room. And I'm not making blanket statements. I'm very aware that there's a lot of progressive organizations out there, and there's some that just have not caught up yet. But in my experience, I'm 29 in a corporate setting with a bunch of 40, 50-year-old people. I'm not going to say no. You know, like I feel like my lived experience is just do it. That's what got you here. That's what's going to keep you here, and just be frustrated about it to yourself. Mm-hmm. And so I was the note taker, right? Like in meetings, like, oh, Alex will take notes for us.
Oh, geez.
Well, why? There's 10 other people in the room that can write and got here too, you know, like why?
They have college degrees from Morton.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure they can write really well. But
they're not using ChatGPT at all.
Not yet.
But those are just some of the things that we experience. And from my perspective, it's because we've been taught to say yes to everything, every opportunity, because you don't know what opportunity is going to get you to the next level.
Do you think it's also because we assume those roles at home?
Absolutely.
So it's just like, oh, well, you know how to do this. You like host the birthday parties at your, like, you know what I mean? Like, this is kind of like your wheelhouse.
And one of the things I talk about in the book too is you're never going to see a change in the workplace unless you start that change at home, right? Mm-hmm. Like you have to start discussing what gender roles look like at home for that to carry over to the workplace. It's not going to work opposite.
Right.
So you're having those conversations with Lucas and Ava?
I am. So
are they understanding it? Or are you having to put it in like
no,
Bear
I'm very proud of them.
Do people read those anymore?
I don't know.
They're long, those Bernstein Bear talks.
They really are. Mm-hmm. I was in the car with both of them a couple years ago, and Lucas said to his sister, well, you have to listen to me because I'm the boy. And so I was like,
deep breaths, Mom.
Teaching moment. So I pulled over and I was like,
pull over. I'm actually scared for Lucas right now.
And I turned around and I was like, here's why we're not going to say that anymore, right? Like Ava can do absolutely anything she wants to do as long as she puts her mind to it. And so can you. And you're going to be supportive of her. And I have this like 5-year-old looking at me like, what is wrong with you? Like, just let us be in the back seat. But I'm very intentional around the way I say it. I don't want to feel like they have it coming at them at all times. But in the opportunity, if they see it in a moment in TV or they experience it at school, I use it as a teaching moment.
So let's talk about your next book.
Yeah.
Your next book coming up. That's So Now What? Harnessing Grief After Life's Major Losses. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So it's a topic that I never really thought that I was going to have to write about, right? It's about the grief journey, and it focuses on my experience from losing Michael, my husband, and being a single mom and a business owner and a daughter and a sister, and how do you navigate those relationships? Because I'm very much a reader. What I found when he passed away was I either had a lot of spiritual-based resources, or I had a lot of resources that were written by a psychologist or a trauma expert. And I just wanted something that was written for me from somebody that went through it, that was an everyday person. And that's how I start the book. I will say, I'm not an expert in grief. I'm an expert in my grief journey. And here's how I navigated it. So I spend a lot of time defining what grief is, talking about how the U.S. culture is such a death-denying culture that we don't adequately prepare for it, right? We spend so much time focusing on how do we keep somebody alive? How do we live longer? What are all these things that we can do to look great when we're 70, 80, 90, but we never really talk about what happens next and how do we prepare for that. So I spend some time on that. I spend some time navigating how do you navigate grief with your kids who probably never had a loss like this when you also are navigating such a tough loss. And the perspective that I wanted to take was it doesn't have to be a loss in terms of death. It can be anything that you really qualify as a loss. We all go through mourning, and we follow similar paths when we're mourning something else and not particularly just a death. And then I end the book with what are the unintended, unexpected gifts of grief? And so even though this was such a tragic loss, what are the good things that we can take forward because this happened? And that's not something necessarily that you talk about either, right? That's a little bit taboo to say, oh, there's a good thing that happened because somebody passed away. So I'm really excited about it. I hope it's a resource for individuals that are going through grief. It just came out last month. And then I have a children's book that goes with it that's coming out later this summer.
Is that about grief also?
It
Talking to your
is.
children about grief?
Yeah. So I found for them, they very much love to read too. There was either a resource that was very black and white that spelled out death that I felt was just a little bit too much for them at their age, or there was something so high level that the message just wasn't coming across. And so I wanted to be somewhere in the middle, that we very respectfully talk about loss, but we don't make it so that you're uncomfortable after you've read the book.
And so what's one of the positives you could share?
We have the opportunity, after Michael passed away, to partner with the Greater Philadelphia YMCA in his name. We set up a 5-year commitment to their Teen Tech Center in North Philly. And so that is a center where any child in the Greater Philadelphia area can come in after school, and they can learn things like production and coding and music, and so that they're not out on the street potentially getting into some trouble. And so that's a really great thing that's happened in his name and that we've taken forward. I'm also cognizant that not everybody's in that space right after somebody passes away, so we talk about things like setting up rituals or memorials for the individual, keeping their journey and their story going, and looking back on it as a positive and not necessarily as such a tragic loss in your life.
So Alex.
Yes.
You've got some killer rock star tattoos.
Thank you.
And I have to know if we can go there.
Yeah.
Because you're a very expressive person, right?
Yeah.
People like this have creative thoughts and want to put them out. So can you explain what some of them
Absolutely.
the meaning behind some of them?
So I will tell you too, when I was at Rowan, no like maybe one that you would never see, right?
Wow.
And as I left, I really always liked tattoos, but it was just not something that you saw in a corporate world. And I still think we're on the cusp of it being more accepted. And I even had somebody come up to me and say, like, how do you get a job with like all your tattoos and you have hand tattoos? And I'm like, well, you know, not to sound smug, but I own my business, so it doesn't really apply to me. But
Yeah. I didn't get these until I started my own business,
But yeah, so I went for a nautical theme
Love it.
on my left arm. I now have, so my hand tattoos are very personal with my husband. So I have my husband's signature on there. He lived in Florida for a short period of time. So after he passed, we took some of his ashes out in off the coast of where he lived and had them at sea. And so I got the coordinates of that on my hand.
Oh, that's cool.
That's beautiful.
And then on my other arm, I always call that just like a smattering of whatever I liked at that current period. So I went through a phase where I was like super into like Viking symbols and transcendent symbols. And I was like, that looks great. I'm going to do that. So
I'll just put that on there.
I love The Office. So I have an Office tattoo.
Wait,
I have
let's see that
Dwight.
one. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's so cool. 'Cause this is the outline.
My kids love that. They're like, the person from The Office, who is that? And then I just started to kind of collect things that really meant a lot to me in the moment after that. Once I got through the phase where I was just like, yeah, every other week, let me go for a tattoo that I like today. I started to put things that had a lot of meaning. So it was around my kids and my family and ideas that were really important to me. So I have a tattoo of an outline of Ruth Bader Ginsburg after she passed away, and it says dissent on it. And so I linked that to when I released the book. And then I have my kids' names and my husband's name probably at least 2 or 3 times in various areas.
You know, a tattoo I've seen is very cool, like the footprints of the kids
Yes.
and stuff.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen any of those?
Yeah.
Those are so neat.
Yeah. I always get the where did it hurt the most? And so I will say, if you are out there trying to get a tattoo, really think about it if you want to get one on your foot.
Oh, yeah, I've heard foot hurts
The
because there's
worst.
not a lot of skin there, right?
No, it was just, and I committed to a pretty big foot piece my first go around, and it was just not a good idea.
Yeah. I'm surprised you got any more after that.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm a glutton.
So Alex, we'll have to bring you back for your 3rd or 4th and 5th book since you're writing 6 or 7 of these at a time.
I know. I'm really excited about this one. It's not that the first one wasn't personal. This one was just so unexpected. And it is for individuals that have going through life experiences like I did. And I really want to be the support that I might not have had when I was going through it.
Jess, I could have talked all day to Alex about some of the more wild stories that she had. She
I
probably
know.
has a lot more than she probably wanted to share.
I know. Well, she was very respectful of her background, and she was
A pro's
great
pro.
professional.
She's a pro's pro is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Was really wonderful to have in studio. We learned so much about her and so much about so many of our alums are writing books, and it's just really cool to be able to see the names of alums on the shelves at the bookstores. So I think we talked about this, but we need to have a whole section of the Barnes & Noble on campus that's just alumni written books.
We should write a book about people who write books.
You
Our
could do that.
alumni, right?
Yeah,
That
I'll
would help.
co-author it.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you next time on the next episode of Beyond the Brown and Gold.
You've been listening to Beyond the Brown and Gold on Rowan Radio 89.7 WGLS FM. You can find more episodes on your favorite podcasting platforms by searching for Beyond the Brown and Gold or Rowan Radio On Demand.